Thanks for joining us today here at Streaming Media East. We're having a panel today on benchmarking your broadcast video workflows. And what that means and what we're going to talk about is some of the challenges in terms of live and on-demand workflows, knowing how fast or slow your workflows are, and some of the bottlenecks and things to overcome to deliver your streams to your audiences in the live environments as quickly as possible. And in VOD, how quickly you can get your assets in, processed, and back out to all your different syndication partners. And so on the panel today, I have some great folks with us that'll share a lot of information in detail on their workflows, as well as we'll present some data that we've collected from the industry and others who have responded to some surveys that we've sent out. So I'll let each person introduce themselves. Maybe just tell a little bit about yourself, what you do, and then maybe what your company's known for.
Okay, this one's going to be easy for me. I'm Grant Nodine. I'm from the National Hockey League. I'm the SVP of Technology. I've been at the league for 16 years. I've worked on probably all of our internet-facing architecture, all of our broadcast architecture in our venues, and all of our tapeless workflows and media asset management system deployments. Primarily, I kind of I look at technologies and I decide what we're going to use, and I kind of implement them as needed.
I'm Lionel Bringier from Elemental Technologies. So I'm Director of Product Management for our video delivery product. Elemental Technologies, we are first and foremost doing encoders and transcoders, live encoders and file-to-file transcoders. And we've extended our business to video delivery last year with a new video delivery platform called Elemental Delta to help our customers doing a more efficient delivery and provide value-added services.
Hey, I'm Ken Zamko, VP Marketing at LiveView. LiveView is known as the cellular bonding backpack company. So we started out a few years ago with devices that bond together multiple cell phone connections to transmit live video from the field without the need for satellite trucks. Though now we've kind of gone full circle where some of our customers actually integrate those in their existing vehicles and so on. And it's also expanded to a variety of cloud services that complement that field acquisition.
Great. And I'll be moderating the panel today. I'm Tim Napoleon. I'm Chief Strategist at All Digital. All Digital, we have a product called Brevity, which lets you upload your videos to your favorite cloud very quickly. And while it's uploading, it can also do the compression and transcoding. So let's start the panel out. I've collected some survey data, and we'll start out with some questions around live workflow first. So in this question, everybody see that okay? Up on the board there? It's a question about when you're shooting a live video and you're streaming it, whether for an NHL game or other applications, how quickly do you want that video to come back on the user's device or desktop browser? What's that delay? Some people call it latency, some people call it delay. I don't know if there's a perfect word for it. Some people call it hand wave, when you wave in front of the camera. How quickly do you see that wave in front of the device? So in broadcast the world, we've been kind of conditioned with something with the FCC kind of dump button delay of maybe 7 seconds. And our survey shows that there's still a lot of people in the OTT and streaming world that are way above that, 20, 30 seconds. And then there's some people that are on the bleeding edge there that got down into the sub 6 seconds. So I guess the two-part question of the panel here would be, what do you think is reasonable, and what are some of the challenges and concerns when you bring down that latency, or what are some of the opportunities when you bring down that latency?
So, I mean, I think anytime you have a product that is being broadcast on television as well as being streamed live, ideally you'd like to have those latencies match. Obviously, you can take advantage of multi-camera angles and stuff like that. If you have latencies that are in line, you can start to power different second stream content when you have a match between the broadcast and the online latencies.
Yeah, if we look at the results of the survey, less than 1 second really doesn't make sense for OTT delivery because it's all based on video chunks, and you have to have at least a gap in a video chunk. So it's surprising. We're in a digital world now, so zero latency is not something you're going to have. And I'd like just to point out that there are many points in the latency, many different factors. There is the encoding side, and a lot of people just focus really on the encoding latency, but that's not it. There is also the push to the origin server. You have captioning too. You have all the delivery inside the CDN. You can have multiple CDNs with rerouting rules between the CDNs. And then there's the player also. Usually the player is buffering between 3 and 5 segments before rendering the first one. So all in all, I think between 5, 6 to 10 seconds is something that can definitely be achievable today. Getting below that is much harder. And you have, there are some initiatives around MPEG dash, for example, with a low latency MPEG dash, but there is no standard and wide adoption on the market today.
So yeah, I agree. There are a lot of different points there that can add the latency, and I think that depends also on the type of content and the type of, I would say, broadcaster or content provider that you are. So as a consumer, I agree. If I'm watching an NHL game, and let's say whether I'm outside and I'm watching it and I hear other fans cheering when something already happened, or if I'm walking to another room with my phone or iPad and the latencies are different, then obviously it's not an optimal experience. But we're seeing a lot of college content and a lot of high school content that would never have ended up on TV to begin with. And I think in those cases, maybe you don't really care so much about the latency. You don't care if it's 15 or 20 seconds, as long as you can deliver a good experience. And again, that latency could, as mentioned, come from a number of different sources. So depending on the type of connectivity that you have in some of those venues that for colleges and high schools, obviously, they're not very well connected always, and other parts of the workflow. So in those cases, I think 20 or even 30 seconds is acceptable for a lot of these guys, because it's not something that's going to run on TV in parallel.
Well, I think it's a good trade-off for quality too, right? So if you drive up latencies on a lossy connection to the internet, you're going to increase the quality of the source material, and so it's a worthy trade-off.
Yeah.
That's great. So, and I guess this is kind of the same question, but in a little bit asked a different way. What would be your ideal delay in stream propagation time? And so I think you kind of answered it here. Somewhere around that 5 seconds seems like something that you can definitely shoot for live events. And I think one of the key there that always used to kind of people would say in streaming media, well, it's all about time and space, so who cares if your live streams aren't really in sync, because they're watching on that device, they don't know that it's not live. But then with the advent of the app and the kind of basis of like Twitter and Facebook posts and other things and notifications on your phone, it can be very frustrating. And all of a sudden, you start getting all these notifications about a goal or a score, and then several seconds later, you get the actual stream. It kind of ruins the experience for the fan at times. So I think this shows that the target really is at under 5 seconds. Anybody agree or disagree with that?
Well, I think there's competing forces that are driving them and driving the latencies in different directions, right? So I think there's certain concerns that gaming companies and things like that would like to drive latencies as low as humanly possible, right? And then there's other concerns like formulating a good second screen experience and and delivering a good quality product to your fans that tend to drive the latency up in the opposite direction. So there's definitely a trade-off. I think I don't know that the sub 5 seconds is probably the right benchmark there. It's probably, like I said, it's more in line with, hey, can you equal the broadcast latencies?
Yeah, equaling the broadcast latency is something that we should target really. I have another example for bets, horse racing, things like that. There is money involved, and so the latency is the primary concern. And as Grant said, it's a trade-off between several parameters. And in this case, they can accept to have a lower picture quality because they really want to focus only on the latency.
So the information takes precedent over the video quality.
Yeah.
I like that. Especially if your horse is winning.
Yep. Or not.
So the next set of questions here gets into video publishing for VOD. And VOD is a very loaded term because that can mean lots of things to lots of industries, lots of different people. VOD can talk about the whole packaging of content. It can get into pre-production as well as post-production distribution. So I know that's a very broad question. But really, I think when we're kind of defining the term for the online streaming community is as you're receiving finished assets, and then you need to get those out to your different screens and your different syndication partners, kind of how happy or not happy are your customers, or what are some of the things that you're dealing with that make customers unhappy? And by customers, I mean your different partners that are accessing your content.
I mean, I think it all comes down to driving latencies down, and VOD is choosing the right source material to use, right? So you can go and say, hey, I'm going to have a all broadcast quality driven VOD delivery mechanism, but it's going to drive latencies up, right? So generally speaking, for things that that are very short tail, so game highlights, things of that nature, the important thing is to basically deliver them as quickly as you possibly can. So what you really want to do is you want to basically use the video that you're bringing back as a stream. So your whatever your mezzanine is for your stream is. The stream that you basically then go and spin off into all of the different adaptive bit rates and things like that. That's what you want to use for your highlight operation, so that you can avoid basically. So you're basically spitting out a highlight, and all you're doing is really saying, "Hey, I'm going to demux this into the various bit rates that I'm doing, and deliver it," and rather than I'm going to take this ProRes file and then try to transcode it and to 17 different formats and then deliver it that way. And that way you leverage the infrastructure that you build to deliver live signals to people in order to basically get that very short tail, quick turnaround VOD content out. The longer form stuff, generally speaking, you're going to go and you're going to use actually a broadcast workflow, and you're going to try and get that content into your asset management system and use your existing conform processes to deliver it.
Great. One of the things I noticed on here too is it says varies day to day is one of the main answers. So our winner, the most people said, hey, weather can change like the Himalayas around here, right? And one of the things driving that I noticed is one of the other questions later on in the survey was, what is the peak utilization? So what is the amount, how many hot dogs do you have to eat on any given day, right? The velocity, right?
Yeah.
Everybody can eat one hot dog. Eating 52 hot dogs in 12 minutes, that's tough, right? So the peak ratios there of, some people were saying that, their normal day is 1, and then their peak days are 100. So the unit to peak utilization is huge, and so do you build out to that giant peak to keep everybody happy, or are you okay with having a few bad days and saving a lot of money? So that's another, right? Is that a trade-off?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we have a choice there. I mean, so basically I have to build everything as if there's going to be 15 games every night, and usually there's 7 or 8 on average. So, but there's nights where we have 3, and then Saturday nights when, of course, no one's in the office, there's 13, and so it varies pretty widely. But we try to keep an even keel and just build stuff out so that we can deliver on the absolute worst day, and then the other days are all good, right?
Yeah, we can have also some new solutions for scalability. At Elemental Technologies, we have a cloud platform, we have ground appliances, and we have auto-scaling between the ground and the cloud. So if you have peaks of transcoding or live encoding, for example, we powered the World Cup of soccer, so it's very similar to the NHL. Except that it's only for one event, so it's only 2 months, and in those 2 months, you have up to 8 games at the same time with 8 cameras at the same time. So 64 streams to be encoded in multiple bit rates. But it's only for the 2 hours, 3 hours of the games, and then it's over. And we leverage our cloud platform to provide that because for 2 months, it doesn't make any sense to build a full on-prem infrastructure for that. For you have
I have an ongoing workflow, and I know what it is, and we're he's right, we're very similar to what they're doing for World Cup without the ice, hopefully. watching soccer on ice is probably not a good move.
So for us, in our part of the business, where we mainly are involved in field acquisition, and it's not always the game feed. So right now, the NHL, the NFL, they're not using live view to transmit the live game, but using a lot of live view to transmit a lot of the game-related content, interviews, skates, NFL warm-ups, and things like that. So we're seeing a lot of that type of content acquisition. With colleges and high schools, we do see full game feeds using our technology, but that's something separate. And I 100% agree, it all depends on the day and on the event. So regular season is going to be very different expectations compared to playoffs or finals. We saw also at the World Cup there was a different level of expectation in terms of how quickly things should get up on the app, and also similarly in the Super Bowl, that's a whole different ballgame. We had customers that built in so much infrastructure into being able to get things out there as quickly as possible. So that all ranges. One example that I wanted to give that's a little bit different from so you mentioned the finished assets. So one workflow that we're seeing is actually before the assets are finished, trying to get things up as quickly as possible without actually having to edit them. So we work with Snappy TV, which now is part of Twitter. And we're seeing a lot of teams, including, for example, the New York Giants right now in their recent minicamp that they had last weekend, basically transmitting everything live, and it goes into a cloud-based, very minimal cloud-based editing console where you just mark in, out, and publish. So they'll have one person monitoring the feed, and every time they see a drill that they like or something interesting on the feed, in, out, publish, and it goes on their mobile app, Twitter, etc. So that's a very easy way for them to get those assets up there literally within seconds of them happening, and not needing to kind of do all the editing and recording, etc.
Yeah, that is something very interesting. We have also this kind of solution for live to VOD applications, catch-up TV, immediate catch-up TV. We ingest all the pre-transcoding adaptive bitrates, and we publish a new manifest, a live to VOD manifest to provide that. And this is something which is driven by Snappy TV. All these Snappy TV has been acquired by Twitter,
yeah.
and it's because of all the social networks. You have to be fast, and you have to be able to publish the highlights right now. You just can't afford to transcode it anymore. You have to make it available right now, immediately.
Yeah, I think the other thing to add there is that one of the things, especially for our live content, that we've seen make a big difference for our business was the ability to basically stream a low bit rate stream directly to YouTube, and basically through Content ID be able to automatically collect any of the clips that are put up by fans and get the revenue and for those.
That's awesome. The next kind of bottleneck buster, if you want to call it that. I think it's a terrible name, but whatever. Is bandwidth, right? So, live view, obviously you have some really creative concepts there around kind of getting over that challenge of getting connectivity out in the field. Grant, you've done some pretty big deals at the venue level to get more connectivity so you have more options. But what this chart's showing here is using a gig, just a gig video size, how long does it take to get that gig out of your video plant over the internet to somewhere else? And that's where products like Brevity and other things help accelerate or send video faster over the web. And so, this kind of shows that there's still a lot of people that aren't really able to use broadcast formats over the web. I mean, I think you need to be in that 70 gigs per hour type range to really have any hope of sending any types of large video files anywhere. And so this would really only make it appropriate for a lot of these folks in the orange and the blue to be using kind of lower definition. It can still be high definition, but like an H.264 transcode file or something. Trying to use ProRes at that kind of speed would just be an act of frustration. So what are your thoughts on how infrastructure, is that one of the big bottlenecks here that we're talking about when you talk about latency in publishing.
Well, certainly, but you know, we're doing our archival encodes for our historical archive at the arena, so that we're not getting an asset that's been transmitted and stepped on, right? And the trade-off there is that we can't have them right away after the game, because I'm moving about 650 gigabytes of data from every game, just in the form of basically two broadcast feeds. So generally, most of our games have at least 2 rights holders. When we get to the finals, it's usually a 4-way broadcast. And we'll record all of those feeds and bring those into our asset management system. In addition to that, we have melts from each of the trucks as well. So we're moving about 600 gigs a night, and I think the key to that is just basically WAN acceleration. I think if you're trying to move it via FTP or something like that, that's very latency sensitive. When you're trying to move assets from Anaheim to New York, it takes a pretty big hit. I'm seeing.
I was wondering why you took so many of our USB sticks from the trade show booth.
Yeah, yeah. I just I helicopter USB sticks to all the venues, and then we ship them back. It's the FedEx model, the SneakerNet.
Smart.
Right. So, but generally speaking, we're seeing transfer rates out of Signiant at about 700 megabits per second over a gigabit link. It goes pretty fast.
So does anyone want to do the math there, what that translates into gigs per hour? So at 700, that'd be something close to about 200 gigs per hour, maybe? Something right about
yeah,
that?
I mean, so a 100 megabit video is what, 1 gig per minute, right?
500, I think. So it depends. It depends how much latency you have in the connection, how much resend.
So I wish we had someone from Pied Piper on the panel.
Yeah, exactly. There's a joke there I'm not going to make. Yeah.
I'll go and pull an old joke and say I was told there'd be no math.
Yeah, exactly. On LiveView, you talked a little bit about bonded connectivity, and so if anybody's ever tried to do a live event or try to be in news production, one of the big latencies is trying to get the local hotel to give you any kind of connectivity and get it set up so you can start your stream, or out in the field, working with a satellite truck or other things to get connectivity. So you're telling me, like, just from normal cell phone coverage, you can turn that into a usable signal.
Yeah, and there's been tremendous progress in the industry over the last few years, both on the technology side, but also on the bandwidth that's become available through all the carriers. So with Verizon having now XLT out there, with AT&T's broad coverage, T-Mobile just launched their brand new LTE, and they're expanding it quickly. Sprint is expanding their LTE network quickly. So between those 4 carriers, you're actually seeing much higher upload speeds. I think on average we're seeing about 3 megabits per second per connection on LTE, but with peaks potentially going up to 20 or or so. But you're seeing some really great speeds, and it depends on the application right now. As mentioned, we mostly work on either news programming or sports programming that goes directly on the web, or behind the scenes sports programming. So for all these applications, you don't need too much bandwidth. So people are very happy with 8 megabits per second of encoding rate, for example. And that's not something that we can't increase. Again, with LTE right now, we could probably even jump to 12, 14, 15, and in most places around the US, we'll see that bandwidth. But right now, there's just not enough demand for it, and I think our customers are happy with the quality that they can get with 8 megabits per second. And also, you have to think about the trade-off in terms of cost. The higher the bit rates, then you're paying more to the carriers as well. But that's what we're seeing right now, and it's become pretty consistent in terms of the bandwidth that you can get. So when we first started, I've been at LiveView for 6 years, and when we first started selling this technology, it was kind of hit or miss depending on where you go to. And people used it mostly as a backup. So they would have the backpack just in case something happened with a truck, or they couldn't get a truck, or they had to go on the move, or they had to be in a place like this where you can't run cables from the truck into the room. And it's changed so much over those last few years, where now those cellular backpacks are actually the primary means of transmission for news and for that related content. And they don't even bother sending the truck unless it's a huge event like the State of the Union and so on. I mean, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but basically you'll see more of the backpacks than you'll see anything else right now. And that's because people have come to trust that connectivity.
That's great.
And there are some.
And then Lionel, you kind of mentioned kind of something that's pretty ingenious in terms of the using different codecs and formats on the ingest side than you actually use on the distribution side to save on bandwidth and connectivity and speed. So I'd love to hear a little bit about that.
Yeah, we have a solution for that, what we called a kind of mini contribution, because yes, 8 megabit per second is sufficient to do 1080p live H.264, but there are many regions on the world in which you just cannot have more than 3-4 megabit per second, and you still want to have a HD content to be live streamed. So what we can provide for that is using HEVC, so the new codec, or H.265. So between H.264 and HEVC, you have, for the same picture quality, 40 to 50% of bandwidth reduced. So you can use, so today the only issue is you don't have a lot of devices capable of decoding HEVC. So what we do is, using a 3G or 4G connection, we do the encoding on the ground with HEVC. We stream it up to the cloud, so we have one HEVC uplink at 3 megabit per second. In the cloud, we do the transcoding from this 1080p at 3 megabits HEVC to 8, 9, 10 different adaptive bitrate profiles from 1080p H.264 at 6 megabits per second to have the same quality, and then we go all the way down to 500 kilobits per second, and then we can do the delivery to the usual devices, because all devices can use H.264. And it's something that can evolve, because I'm pretty sure we'll see more and more devices capable of decoding HEVC natively in the future. So you can still have H.264, but you can also do HEVC delivery to the devices when it's available, and we have ways of managing them. With Elemental Delta, our origin server, we can take H.264 and HEVC and do streams adaptation so that you can target the right devices with the right codecs or the right resolutions and so on.
So to think about that from just a summary point of view, there's a couple things when you want to do to optimize that. It's not just buying more bandwidth. The first thing there is figuring out a good protocol to send over that network. There's specific protocols now that you get like UDP, and products like Brevity and Signant and Aspera use these kind of optimized protocols, and they put further optimizations on top of that around the protocol layer. And so what that does is when you send things through like a web uploader or HTTP or even FTP, there's a lot of overhead in that protocol. And so you might be sending on a 1 gig file, you actually might be sending an extra 20-30% of data. So getting rid of that's one step you take. The next step you meant is compression, right? There's various optimizations that you can get without loss to the video quality. You can apply certain types of compression. And then lastly, while you're sending that video, you may want to then adapt it to other formats and things so that you don't lose compatibility with all your device base. So if you can kind of do those 3 things at once, you're onto something. You got a great way to kind of get video from on the ground into the cloud. And once it's in the cloud, all the different methodologies and tools to get it out to all the different locations.
I think interestingly, we've seen that the kind of quality that we get out of the LiveView kind of product increase over the last couple of years. And I think it's a direct correlation to the fact that you've got much better, more robust arena Wi-Fi networks in place. And so what it does is it basically gets those iPhone users and the Android users basically off of the cellular frequencies and onto the Wi-Fi frequencies, and frees up actually some of the LTE capacity at those locations to be used for backhauls.
Yeah.
Very cool. And then there's a calculator that we put together, so you didn't have to do the math. We can do it for you.
Yeah.
If you go to alldigital.com, there's an ROI kind of calculator that you can do to slide to see how fast it would take you to upload, how much capacity, what compression can kind of help with. So there's a little modeling tool that you can use there to figure out kind of some basic Q theory around your video upload and delivery. This is the next one is and then we'll just let Lionel rip on this one. This is what Lionel's really, really good at. You got really famous. This is like, you know, this is how quickly can you take this video and make it into that video, and that's the encoding process. And so this is the industry here. There's some people that are half real time. There's some people that are like over real time. So again, some of these people are movie folks that are doing it for movie cinema files. There's some people in here that are doing it for live sports and news. So these numbers are a little bit skewed by industry. But Lionel, why don't you tell us a little about what makes it? What are some things you can do to make this process faster?
Well, we have two answers to that. The first one is, so we're all software-defined video, so it's all software, but we can leverage the power of GPUs and CPUs. So we can take a combination between GPUs and CPUs because, you know, when we do transcoding, it's a lot of parallel processing, and GPUs are very capable of doing massive parallel transformations. So we can use CPU only or accelerate them with GPUs so that we have a faster way of doing transcoding compared to
So Lionel,
CPU
real quick,
only.
just because our industry has too many acronyms, and I know I was like embarrassed sometimes to I don't know what like, words mean, but I know what that one was, but I'm just going to tell people. So GPUs is graphical processing unit.
That's
and where you see graphical processing units and where that technology is just really just mind-blowingly gone is in the Xbox and PS4s. And so what they've done is they take technologies that used to be thousands of dollars if you were in the rendering world or you're using Maya or you're using graphic base. You'd have to buy these special, you know, math computers that were these chips that are GPUs, and you'd spend $8,000 on one of these little chips. Well, the consumer phones and the consumer devices have taken that technology down, and companies like NVIDIA with Maxwell and other things have taken those chip prices down to, in some cases, even sub $10. And so you now have the ability, both on consumer devices as well as on high-end workstations, to get this price performance that we've never had in the industry before.
Yeah, it's really very interesting because it's also something that can evolve, you know, compared to traditional hardware-based solutions. Well, let's talk again about HEVC. Today, there is no hardware solution for HEVC. It's all software. We can optimize because you know, the ways we have many parameters for doing the best picture quality, the best encoding at the lowest bit rate. We are coding all our codecs in-house. We are not relying on third-party vendors. And yeah, we have a better performance over the time because we can optimize our codecs, and using the GPUs or the CPUs, it's easy to do. If you do a new hardware revision, it's not cost effective. There's a lot of R&D, and it's not something you can change.
As long as the hardware APIs don't change on you, right?
Yeah.
So one of the things there too that I'd just make like a plea to the industry. I don't know if there's anybody from Yahoo here. No, okay. If you look at your publishing specs of what you're asking for from files, there's some codecs and formats that are just poorly they're not modern. So for example, you know, not to pick on anyone, but like an FLV file format, a lot of times those codecs aren't as professionally written in terms of the speed that they can use GPU and CPU and other things. And so you'll look at your encoding queue and you'll see your H.264 files ripping it better than real time. And you'll look down and you'll see this file running in your queue that's taking 4 times real time or 8 times real time. And because it's using single-threaded processes and other things that you go, like, okay, this is terrible. Why do I have to do this? And it's because some partner or vendor wants this kind of obsolete kind of container maybe for some type of, just because they haven't updated their publishing specs. So another thing there too to help out with publishing times is, you know, I'd love to have everybody kind of review what files they actually need. And so there's all these package deliveries going to all these different syndication partners. Do they really need, you know, an OGG format anymore? Do they really need the FLV? And that would take a lot of burden off the people that are having to syndicate all these files.
Well, and on the high end, you've got the Apples and YouTubes of the world that are like, I want ProRes HQ. You know, it takes a long time just to get it to them. So, you know, there's definitely trade-offs on both ends of the spectrum there.
Yeah, I think you have a couple of competing forces here. On the one hand, you have stronger hardware that's going to keep getting stronger. You have things like H.265, which will theoretically give you the same or twice the quality at half the bit rate. So you have these things that are kind of working towards getting things done faster and at lower sizes. But at the same time, the industry is talking about 4K and 8K. And so if the industry decides to adopt that, that's another hike again that you need to adapt to bigger files and so on.
Yeah.
My daughter's going to
Whack-a-mole.
college and she wants to go to USC, so if we could get that whole industry to adopt those faster, that'd be awesome.
There's also a big change in the industry right now. It's, you know, you have less and less control over the devices that are used by the consumers, because a couple of years back, when you were streaming video, it was through the set-top box on your cable system. Today, the content is consumed on Apple TVs, Android tablets, iPhones, PCs. So there are more and more formats, and you have to support them because that's what the consumers use. I mean, when my kids say, I want to watch TV, they watch Netflix on an iPad. That's what they call TV. It's not the big screen anymore.
The next one is, this touches a little bit on the workflow topic. And what I thought was kind of interesting about this was, what is your biggest delay in publishing content? And so obviously, encoding is one that, Grant, you can solve with money, right? You buy more encoders, and you can buy cloud services. Those are two kind of strategies there that help.
That's a very good idea.
And
Lionel likes
no
that.
pressure, no pressure. No, the delivery obviously is, we talked about a bunch of strategies there around the compression and optimization and buying more bandwidth. So that's another kind of way to optimize that. And then you kind of have the products that make it a little harder to optimize, and it's quality control, right? And so historically in the broadcast world, they like to have visual eyes on content and they like to QA it all. But then you were talking about how much contribution fees and how much sidecar content, how much all this other stuff's coming in. Mm-hmm. It makes really trying to go over the 650 hours of daily content and have that manually reviewed nearly impossible. So people are trying to automate a lot of that quality control, or even outsource the quality control to the consumers via, you know, hashtags that say, hey, the video's broken on Hulu, right? So these are all these kind of different things that are stacked together, or if you can do them in parallel, it saves a lot of time. But, you know, discuss.
Yeah, so I mean, file-based QC is to date still kind of slow and expensive. I think one of the things that I'm thinking about doing, and Lionel again will be pretty happy about this, is basically pushing some of my transcode horsepower to the edge. So in other words, putting it, I need to get more feeds out of my venues for replay. I'd like to basically get those feeds out on a piece of hardware that's also capable of doing, outside of the actual boundaries of the live game, that's also capable of doing some transcode on the edge rather than doing it centrally. And so when I'm pulling this 650 gigs of AVC Intra 100 back from the venues, it'd be nice to basically have it all nice and several different flavors of proxy for it, and have that all delivered in one package rather than basically bringing it all back centrally and then dealing with the other big source of latency, which is basically storage, right? So moving 160 gig files around and copying them back and forth even to very fast SAN volumes is still takes time. And driving as much of that time out as you can. I mean, I think the biggest thing when you're running a historical archive that's full of full res content, and you're also trying to power a streaming business at the same time, is basically figure out how to move files around as little as humanly possible. You're not going to avoid copying them onto LTO storage, but it would be nice to basically, make sure that you're not copying them over your network, number one, and not copying them from volume to volume for various purposes, where transcode cluster A is attached to this volume and B is attached to this volume. You want to take the time and really architect your storage infrastructure so that you're really reducing the number of times that you ever copy large files.
Makes sense.
And for live events, do you have also some QC processes?
Yeah, I mean, live QC basically boils down to there's a lot of hockey fans and they're really loud when things don't work.
You can see that. You can leverage the social networks. You know, if something's
absolutely
wrong, Twitter will tell you
very soon.
Yeah, very soon.
Perfect. So the next question here was, I thought this was an interesting one. There's been a lot of talk about cloud, and basically cloud is, you think of products like Akamai has a transcoding solution. You think of Microsoft Azure has media services. You have Amazon, AWS. They have both their own internal media services, and they also have partner solutions, as does Azure and Akamai. So, does that provide a lot of speed and value? And then you hear a lot of people talking about, kind of just having a lot of equipment right next to these big storage volumes, right next to my people, that's pretty fast too, and I kind of like that. And then there's other people who say, you know what, there's kind of use cases that work really well in the cloud, and there's other use cases that are terrible for the cloud, so I like a hybrid approach. And so in the survey, it was pretty clear that there's definitely two groups of people that are like, I like the cloud, I like on cloud, right? And you've heard inside of corporations, right? You'll hear somebody sees an IBM commercial at halftime, and they go, you know what, we're going to the cloud. And then the operations team's like, what does that even mean, right? Mm-hmm. So really, it seems like the right answer is both. So
I think it has to be both.
I'd love to hear how you guys have kind of heard your customers deal with the decision, do we go to the cloud or do we stay, or we do a little both?
It has to be both, because copying 160 gig files to Amazon is slow. Just has to be. Yeah, and I bet if the same question survey was done 2 years ago, everyone would have said, no, the cloud it's science fiction. It's not something you can deploy right now. And today, half of the answers is hybrid solutions. And I think hybrid solutions is definitely the way to go, because you can mitigate your costs, your scalability. We have auto-scaling models in the cloud, on the ground, between the cloud and the ground. It's very easy, and it gives to our customers a lot of flexibility, because some of our customers have always the same type of content, hockey games, for example. Some other customers, they have different types of content, and for different types of content, you will have, for example, you can have short-form content and feature films. It will not be the same processing time. It will not be the same encoding parameters. So you may need to have new ways of mitigating all the parameters.
I think for our circumstances, we find that the cloud meets everything that we need to do, and also we eliminate points of failure, because when we do have something on premises, you got to make sure all the processes are going to place if your internet is down, if your power is down, and all these things that you need to do. So it depends on the organization, I think. So some organizations can do just cloud, some would need a hybrid.
Excellent.
We can see also sometimes the cloud as a disaster recovery platform. They build all the main workflow on the ground, and they have a backup solution in the cloud that they can trigger if they have to do disaster recovery.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are seeing sticking lower resolution mezzanines that are good enough to deliver all of the VOD content that you want to deliver, whether it's cable labs or or streaming VOD, and sticking that in Glacier just as a kind of a fail-safe.
Yeah. And by the way, we have a full PDF of the full survey here, and then there's also a bunch of questions that were answered that are free form, that weren't just polling questions. So a lot of great insights into that. And so a couple things I just bring out of the survey that we saw, and we'll get about another 10 minutes, and then we'll take some questions. We'd love to get to the meat of the thing is, okay, we obviously see the opportunity. We obviously see the stress that's being put on the operations teams to get all this video out there. Is there an easy way that you can go to management and make an argument for the ROI of speed or the ROI of new gear? There's lots of fun stuff to go buy out on that show floor today. How do you? What's the best way that you've found to say, okay, here's why I want to go get this, and here's what it's going to cost us, but here's how we're going to make money. What are some of those things that you can point at that this is why we're going to make money by doing this?
It's a historically incredibly difficult question to answer, because Frankly, how do you put a price tag on the goodwill of all your fan base, right? It's something that we all understand that is nearly priceless, and we'll do anything to do it. But how do you make sense of what's the right thing to do at the right time? That's a tough question to answer. I mean, I think the right answer is basically you have to do a little bit of everything, and I think you have to say, hey, having more bandwidth at my arenas makes sense because not only am I getting better content to my officials for doing goal reviews, but also I can get multiple camera angles out of the venue. I can start to, experiment with, internet-only feeds, things like that. Referee cams and stuff like that. That's been something that we've been working with Rogers on in Canada that no one really in the States has seen, and that was part of our rights deal with them. And that we would travel encoders to each of our venues that they would use for multicam feeds that are available in their streaming application that streams our content. And I think you're seeing a lot of that kind of stuff.
And so the ROI on that deal is, what was the rights deal with Rogers?
The ROI was pretty good, right? And
a lot of maple syrup, right?
Yeah, and I think most of our ROI driving efforts have been, how do we basically work with our existing broadcast partners to deliver not only a better broadcast product, but a better streaming product? And what's their taste for expense in that area, right?
And then we saw today in the social media side, it was pretty interesting. You saw the big name advertisers that were supporting Twitter, and the revenue behind Twitter's ad base is pretty spectacular. And you saw the direct correlation between time to publish and the amount of retweets and other things for the videos. And so they were, I can't remember the exact term, but the lift, the unpaid for lift by getting content out there faster, and then putting sponsors in front of that now is a new way to monetize. And we see similar things with Facebook and others, that the first post to get out there on a specific story or a news clip gets a majority of the shares. And so it gets that exponential lift at the beginning of it. So you get a lot more traffic by being there early. So if you're at the scene of a news event and you're that first person to get the news feed up and streaming, that's worth a lot more than the guy that gets there a half hour later.
Right. I mean, that's always been like that with news. I mean, that's,
Yeah.
So there's definitely a time, if you're in a news organization or something, that benefits from speed. And then there's also, in terms of, a lot of the new kind of media is reaction videos. So there's some big topic going on and you want to kind of have videos go back and forth on that. So if there's something with Tom Brady and the Deflategate, all these news organizations are like, okay, let's have our take on it and get it back in there. And so you're in that conversation, and then all of a sudden that conversation dissipates and it's gone. And so you have to have a publishing flow there that can allow you to participate with that, not just on live, but also on VOD and mobile and all these different screens. So there's an ROI there. It's just you have to kind of work with a lot of groups to kind of prove it out.
I think the clearest cut ROI that we've been able to really kind of chart was when we started sending live streams directly to YouTube, and you saw basically the unclaimed views go just drop, to nothing really, because essentially you're getting credit for all of the views of all of your content, even if your fans are beating you to publishing it, right?
That's great. So with that, I really think the panel today, I think we got a lot of good technical insight and good advice, and hopefully you guys will be available for a few minutes to talk after the panel to even ask some further questions. But why don't we have, with our last about 10 minutes here, I'd love to hear from the audience, and either you have a contrarian theory or you have a question for the panel. Let's hear a question.
Over there.
What are some of the biggest challenges that you're experiencing day to day going forward as we transition from ground-based assets to moving stuff to the cloud or to the edge, and having your one single team or crew at the venue manage all of this? How do they manage those hybrid workflows and hybrid architectures?
So the question there, just so they can hear it on the streaming, was, what are some of the biggest challenges in managing a hybrid workflow? And how do you have your on-ground team manage both the cloud and on-prem at the same time?
I mean, I think generally speaking, our strategy has been to unify the broadcast and the streaming workflows as much as possible so that the folks that are on the ground in the venues dealing with getting plug-ins from trucks and making sure that feeds get connected in the right places are connecting them once for the entire universe of content that we're delivering to people. To me, that's the most important way to stay on top of that is basically not produce multiple fragmented workflows in order to fulfill certain requirements.
So, oh, go ahead.
It's also an evolution, you know. 2 years ago, there was a big fight between the broadcast guys with broadcast quality and the internet guys with OTT. And managing the bridge between those two worlds was the first step. And now, I think managing hybrid infrastructures between the cloud and the ground is also something it's the next step. You know, there are some internal fights, and at the end of the day, you need to find a way to manage it because that's probably where the infrastructure is going as a general trend, more and more in the cloud.
Yeah, so I do think it's challenging, and if I'm looking at what our customers are dealing with right now, then the good news is that it's much easier and much cheaper to produce content these days, and so you have a lot more of it. On the flip side of it, though, you are managing vast amounts of content coming in from a bunch of different places. If I, again, compare where the industry was when I joined LiveView and today, back then, your average TV station had, let's say, 3, 4 satellite trucks, and that was their live programming from the field. Now you're talking about, they still have the multiple trucks, they have a bunch of LiveView backpacks, we have a streaming app, so reporters that are out there without an actual photographer can just stream directly from their phone. You can take user contributions from Twitter and YouTube and so on. And so somebody over there needs to basically, you know, it goes back to what we talked about earlier, you need to monitor all these feeds. We had a good example now with Sky News during the UK elections just a few days ago. So they had 150 IP streams, so 150 LiveView feeds coming into the same room where they had to mix between all of them. And that was the first time they did all these, you know, many IP streams concurrently. So it is challenging, and you still kind of need to know the old languages of, I don't know, SDI and megahertz and so on, but increasingly you need to understand the new language of bit rates and so on. So, you know, mostly people who have been in the industry for a while are maybe not as familiar with some of the new terms, and new people joining in from college, they don't care about any of those, you know.
If you want to feel like you're just a little bit slower than everybody else, go talk to Colleen over at Facebook. I mean, she's just she just gets it from it's an IP world. She, you know, just totally like focused on that.
They're all bits.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
it's
same thing.
it's fun to see that, you know. And
Yeah.
I think that's what's fun about this show is it brings together both the broadcasters and the kind of new media folks, and they kind of hash it all out and kind of hopefully take the best of both.
So it's the biggest challenge, content management. Yeah.
So
You got one over there.
okay, I'll grab the gentleman in the front here. He had his hand up right away.
Yeah, you know, we've been talking about time to publish, latency, workflow efficiencies. How do you guys deal with dynamic ad insertion, closed captioning, metadata for discovery of your, you know, content? Those three issues seem to be.
Yeah, so we actually.
You want to repeat the question? So
Oh, okay. So he asked, how do you deal with, we were talking about time to publish, and how do you deal with metadata and captioning and things like that, and how do you kind of control for those, right? Interestingly enough, you know, we spent a lot of money going and putting very low latency codecs out in all of our venues so we could get the broadcast feeds back as quickly as possible, and then everybody came along and said, hey, you got to caption everything, and we said, and so we basically ended up taking front hauls for a lot of the stuff. And so you increase the latency, obviously, with the satellite hop for most of them, because most of them are still off of satellite. There's a couple of teams that are all terrestrial. But so you did that so that you could get the captioning data. Now, I think over time, you're going to see that start to go away, and you're going to start to say, hey, we're getting enough feeds out of the venue that we really want to actually produce this content centrally. In which case you're going to caption it centrally, and then you're going to find yourself very much in a broadcast workflow, right? And you're going to be back in the scenario where, okay, we're able to actually beat broadcast latencies because we don't have to do profanity delays on the internet.
Perfect. Well, hey, we'll have a few minutes over here on the side. We'll step out over there for the next panel. Can come up here and continue answering some questions. We're out of time. Really, thank you for coming out today. Thank you for our panel.
Thank you.
And hopefully you guys got some good information.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.